Hello all. So today we're talking about cardiorespiratory training programs. This is chapter 15. So according to the most recent American College of Sports Medicine position stand, the scientific evidence demonstrating the beneficial effects of exercise is indisputable, and the benefits of exercise far outweigh the risks in most adults. Regular cardiorespiratory resistance, flexibility, and neuromotor exercise training is considered essential for most adults. This chapter will focus on one of the primary components of a balanced exercise program, cardiorespiratory endurance. The other major components, resistance and flexibility training and neuromotor exercise training, we'll talk about a little bit later. So the objectives associated with this chapter are to understand the development of cardiovascular exercise guidelines over time, but also to apply the FIT BP principles of exercise prescription to cardiovascular exercise training, and also understand the physiological basis of the warm-up and cool-down, as well as to use metabolic equations or MET values to determine desired workload. Cardiorespiratory endurance training refers to the ability of an individual to perform large muscle, repetitive, moderate to high intensity exercise for an extended period. The goal is to increase heart rate and respiration in order to place an appropriate physiological stress on the cardiorespiratory system. This required stress is often referred to as overload. The term overload is commonly used when referring to resistance or strength training, such as lifting a weight heavier than typically done in daily activity to stress the muscle, resulting in increases in strength and potential hypertrophy, but also applies to cardiorespiratory training. Overload of the cardiovascular and respiratory system is required to have beneficial adaptations and cardiorespiratory endurance. Cardiorespiratory fitness is a function of enhancing both the central oxygen delivery system and the peripheral oxygen uptake mechanisms of the working muscles, enhancing the body's ability to deliver and utilize oxygen for metabolic processes allows one to do more work. Typical measurements used to determine improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness include increases in maximal oxygen consumption, or O2 max, and decreases in heart rate, or O2, in response to a given submaximal workload. The benefits of cardiorespiratory endurance include the following: decreased risk of premature death from all causes, and specifically from heart disease and type 2 diabetes, reduction in death from all causes, increased likelihood of increased habitual activity levels that are also associated with health benefits. More benefits from regular physical activity and or exercise are listed in the next slide. Clearly, including cardiorespiratory endurance training in an exercise program has many benefits and is instrumental in designing a balanced health-related program. So here you can see more benefits associated with cardiorespiratory endurance. In designing a cardiorespiratory exercise session, it includes a warm-up, an endurance phase, and a cool down. The warm-up prepares the person for the endurance phase, where a target intensity is to be achieved, allowing for appropriate overload. The cool down allows the person to transition back toward resting levels. So a warm-up constructed exercise program will include a transition period from rest to the target exercise intensity. This transition period is called the warm-up. During the warm-up, the client should gradually increase body temperature by incorporating low-level activities similar to what will be done during the endurance phase. For example, an appropriate warm-up for a brisk walking program should include slow walking. The muscle groups used are similar in the two activities, slow walking being a low-intensity activity which naturally leads to the brisk walking of the exercise program. The warm-up may also include gentle dynamic stretching exercises, although stretching should not be done with cold muscles. The specific activities included in a warm-up will vary depending on the target activity to be included in the endurance phase. In general, the warm-up should include 5 to 10 minutes of low-intensity, large muscle activity. that progresses to an intensity at the lower end of the target exercise range for the endurance phase. The intent of a warm-up is to prepare the muscles and cardiorespiratory system for the upcoming workout. It is a time of transition and provide a gradual rather than an abrupt increase in heart rate, respiration, and body temperature, and enjoyment of the target exercise during the endurance phase. The benefits of completing a warm-up include the following. It may reduce the susceptibility of injury to muscles or joints by increasing the extensibility of connective tissue. It may also improve joint range of motion and function, and may improve muscle performance. It may also help prevent ischemia or lack of oxygen to the heart muscle, which may occur in clients with sudden strenuous exertion. The warm-up allows a transition from rest to the endurance phase, which is at a higher level of intensity. The objective of the endurance phase is to provide the appropriate overload to promote beneficial cardiorespiratory adaptations. Thus, the fitness professional must consider and balance the exercise prescription principles of FIT VP. Each of these factors, as they pertain to cardiorespiratory endurance, is discussed in more detail later in this chapter. The cool down, on the other hand, is a transition from the higher intensity of the endurance phase back toward resting levels. The cool down allows heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration rate to shift downward and back toward resting levels by allowing a gradual progression toward resting rather than abruptly stopping exercise. The client will avoid an acute excessive drop in blood pressure that could result in dizziness that differs from the positive adaptation that exercise can provide to lower blood pressure chronically. Gradual decreases in intensity also helps remove metabolic end products such as lactate from muscles used more intensely during the conditioning phase. Approximately 10 minutes of diminishing intensity activities are appropriate for a typical cool down. For exercise done at higher intensity during the endurance phase, a longer cool down may be warranted. However, for the client who uses brisk walking as an exercise mode for the endurance phase, an appropriate cool down could be a bit shorter and could include slow walking for 5 minutes, followed by 5 minutes of dynamic body stretches. According to the American College of Sports Medicine Guidelines, or ACSM, the optimal frequency of aerobic exercise appears to be 3 to 5 days per week, for most adults, with the frequency varying with the intensity. For sedentary individuals, incorporating even a couple of days per week can initiate improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness, although additional benefits may be achieved beyond 5 days per week. Improvements are attenuated as the frequency increases, such that a plateau in benefits is often seen with exercise done greater than 5 days per week. Admittedly, individuals focused on competition or high-level performance will likely train 6 or more days per week in the hopes of getting additional gains. However, training at high intensity or vigorous activity for greater than 5 days per week might increase the incidence of injury and is not recommended for most adults. Clearly, different goals will require altering the exercise program and thus involve different associated risks. Initial fitness levels determine the appropriate exercise intensity needed to achieve the required overload. Intensity levels are necessarily higher in fit than in unfit individuals because the threshold for cardiorespiratory benefits is higher. Higher intensity exercise carries more cardiovascular and orthopedic risk. There is an inverse relationship between the recommendations for frequency and intensity, such that if the exercise intensity is held at the lower end of the target range, then the frequency can be increased and vice versa. In some situations for deconditioned individuals, multiple short daily exercise sessions may be more appropriate. For individuals with lower fitness, intensity levels as low as 45% oxygen uptake reserve or below may provide sufficient challenge to increase their VO2 max. In contrast, highly trained athletes may train at 95% of O2 max or higher. Moderately trained individuals may find that 70 to 80% of VO2 max provides a sufficient training stimulus. Intensity can be determined using various methods. In Table 15.2, it provides an overview of the intensity classifications for cardiorespiratory endurance. Some methods of estimating intensity require knowledge of O2 max or maximal heart rate and or resting heart rate. Others rely on estimations of heart rate max based on age. The fitness professional must use the information available to determine the most appropriate exercise prescription, realizing the shortcomings of the various methods. A good fitness professional has the willingness and ability to provide the appropriate overload and prescription to the client. Exercise intensity can be determined from O2 reserve, which is the difference between their O2 max and resting oxygen consumption. To use O2R to determine intensity, one must have access to O2 max information and know that their O2 rest is estimated to be 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute, also referred to as one metabolic equivalent or MET, and is used for all individuals. The following equations are to determine target intensity if O2 max is known. The target O2, the lower end, is equal to 40% times O2 max minus O2 rest plus O2 rest. The upper end range of their target O2 would be equal to 89% times O2 max minus O2 rest plus O2 rest. So although ACSM recommends a range of between 40 and 50% up to 89% of O2 rest, are the actual percentages that the fitness professional uses to determine the appropriate O2 range must be made with the client's fitness level and goals in mind. Low fit clients will tend to start on the lower end of the range or even lower, whereas other clients will require intensities toward the upper end of the range to receive the appropriate overload. Often a personal trainer will not have access to information on O2 consumption because heart rate and oxygen consumption have a linear relationship. In the absence of oxygen consumption information, heart rate can be used. When heart rate is used to determine intensity consumption, ACSM recommends a range between 64 and 76% up to 95% of heart rate max. The following calculation can be used to determine the exercise target heart rate based on a percentage of heart rate max. For example, for a 20-year-old with an estimated heart rate max of 200, so 220 minus 20 is equal to 200 beats per minute, the range will be 128 to 190 beats per minute. However, the resulting target heart range may be so wide that it is not helpful to guide the client's exercise session. The personal trainer must therefore consider the client's health history and fitness goals to narrow the range. For apparently healthy individuals, the range is often narrowed to 70 to 85% of heart rate max. Therefore, the 20-year-old moderately active client, the target heart range will be 140 to 170 beats per minute. If a client is very deconditioned or unfit, then a lower percentage will be used, such as 55 to 70%. Using heart rate and prescribing exercise intensity can be helpful as it represents a client's physiological response, but it too has its shortcomings. Accuracy can be compromised when estimates of HR max are used when medications are taken, which may influence heart rate, such as beta blockers, a drug that suppresses heart rate at rest and during exercise. Medication use can be identified within the initial health history and should be updated as needed when changes in medication occur. When an actual measured heart rate taken during a graded exercise test is unavailable, the personal trainer or fitness professional commonly uses an age predicted estimate, 220 minus your age. Be aware that there are some controversies over using this method to estimate heart rate max. The concern with this method is the wide range of HR variability for a given single age. 1 SD equals 10 to 12 beats per minute. Thus, a 20-year-old may not have an HR max of 200 as predicted by this formula, but instead his or her estimate could be as low as 188 or as high as 212. Some population-specific equations for estimating HR max are available. These may be superior to the 220 minus age equation, as at least in some individuals, although they are not recommended for universal application. Table 15.9 provides the commonly used equations for estimating heart rate max for various populations, although directly measured HR max is preferred to estimated methods. When this is not feasible, an equation using one of these methods is acceptable. When estimating heart rate max, choose an equation that most represents the client population. RPE is also used to subjectively rate overall feelings of exertion during exercise, and so can be helpful in guiding exercise intensity. Commonly used is a 6 to 20 point scale, the Borg RPE scale. The threshold level for cardiorespiratory endurance appears to be at an RPE between 12 and 16. The verbal descriptors for this range include somewhat hard to hard when using RPE. The fitness professional should keep in mind the variability between individuals. The RPE value will not necessarily correspond directly with a particular percentage of HR max or percentage of heart rate reserve, and then make adjustments as needed. RPE is often recommended for determining exercise intensity in older adults and is helpful for individuals having a difficulty assessing their heart rate or who are taking medications which affect heart rate. Although older adults are encouraged to attain similar amounts of physical activity related to days per week and time per session as younger people, given the wide range of fitness levels in older adults, using a perceived exertion scale, for example, a moderate or 5 to 6 level rating of exertion on a 10-point scale, to gauge intensity is often more preferable than standard activity descriptions. For example, for some older adults, moderate intensity activity may be a slow walk, whereas for others it may be a brisk walk or jog. A very simple way to consider intensity is the talk test. This simply means that as clients exercise, they should be able to speak or have a conversation with someone. When comfortable speech is not possible, they're gasping for breath after every word or two, it may indicate that the intensity is moving above the level typically described. Thus, the goal is to exercise as close to the point at which speech first becomes difficult. And here is a table describing the methods of estimating exercise intensity for cardiorespiratory endurance. So you can see the heart rate reserve, the percentage of heart rate max, and then the percentage of VO2 max, as well as the perceived exertion, or Borg, using the Borg scale on a 60 to 20 RPE scale. In relation to that, the intensity relative to the maximal exercise capacity in METs, and how that's associated with that. And here you can see the metabolic calculations for the estimation of energy expenditure with some common physical activities such as walking, running, leg cycling, and arm cycling. So you can see with each of them, you're looking at the resting component. That's 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute, or 3.5 is 1 MET. And that's at rest. You also see that it calculates that you should calculate in the horizontal component as well as the vertical component, which is more of the resistance component. And there are some limitations to each of these calculations, so just something to be aware of. And this is an example for metabolic equations. So it's looking at a 29-year-old female. She weighs about 150 pounds. Or 68.2 kilograms. Height, she's 69 inches or 1.75 meters. And you can see for VO2 max is 45 milliliters per kilogram per minute or 12.9 METs. So to calculate the VO2R, use the following formula. The target VO2R, which would be a percentage, times her VO2 max, which is 12.9, minus her VO2 at rest, and then you add in the VO2 rest. So Anne's VO2 max puts her above the 80th percentile in the excellent category. As a result, her fitness professional decides to prescribe a range of 60 to 80% VO2R to determine the target VO2 range. The calculations for Ann are, you can see the target VO2 on the lower end. So we're using 60%, and her VO2 max was 45 milliliters per kilogram per minute. We're subtracting that by the rest, which is 3.5. Then we're adding the rest back in. So that puts her at 28.4 milliliters per kilogram per minute, which would be 8.1 METs. You do the same thing for the upper end, only you're multiplying that by 80%, and that gives you a 10.5 MET. So she needs to exercise in that 8.1 to 10.5 MET level to actually see some benefit from her exercise. So Ann indicates that using your club membership, she enjoys brisk walking and jogging on the treadmill, as well as some stationary cycling and bench stepping. She needs help to determine the right intensity setting so that she gets sufficient stress but is not working too hard. So when using the equation for walking, you can see you select the walking on the treadmill as the lower end of the intensity range, then determine the grade necessary to reach that level. And you can see she feels comfortable at walking around 3.7 miles per hour. So the equation for walking is VO2, so milliliters per kilogram per minute is equal to 0.1 times speed. That was the equation given on the previous slide, plus 1.8 times the speed times the grade, plus 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And because she enjoys walking at that speed, the first thing you should do would be to calculate the speed in meters per minute, and then you're going to multiply the speed in miles per hour by 26.8, and therefore 3.7 will be 5.9 kilometers per hour, which is 99.2 meters per minute. And then you calculate the grade in with that. And so 28.4 milliliters per kilogram per minute times the 0.1 or the 1% times 99.2 plus 1.8 times the 99.2 times grade, and then add in that 3.5 milliliters per kilogram, and you get the you're going to get the grade at 0.08 or 8%. So for the lower end of the intensity range, Ann will walk on the treadmill at 3.7 miles per hour with an 8% grade. And you can see you do the same thing for running. It's only that the speed is going to be quite a bit higher. And so if she was to run with a 1% grade on the treadmill, then it changes the speed to 5.9 miles per hour. And then you do the same thing with the cycling and stepping. And here are some commonly used equations for estimating maximal heart rate. So the one 220 minus your age is not the only one. There are others that have come up with formulas as well. The Fox formula is the one that it tends to be most commonly used. But you can see the others have been verified and are common as well. So this is again another example of using the MET table. We're going to go ahead and go on. This is the Borg rating of perceived exertion. Now ideally you can see it ranges from 6 to 20. So 6 is with no exertion at all, and 20 would be the hardest you could stand. And for most of us, we want to operate at a somewhat hard to hard level. So 13 to 15 is where we would most likely be for most of our exercise. The mode of exercise needs to be selected with the consideration of the client's fitness level, their health, their skill, and their interests. During the consultation with the client, it is best to discuss what activities are most enjoyed as well as those that are accessible. Enjoyability and access may seem obvious, but are important to consider when selecting an exercise mode for best possible adherence. Typically, cardiorespiratory exercises are those that involve the use of large muscle groups in a repetitive or rhythmic fashion. Some activities are weight dependent, meaning that body weight is moved during the exercise, such as walking or running. In other activities, body weight is not a factor because the body is supported, such as cycling and swimming. These activities are referred to as weight-bearing and non-weight-bearing exercises, respectively. Use of non-weight-bearing exercises may be useful in avoiding injuries of the lower limbs due to overuse. ACSM has classified a number of cardiorespiratory endurance activities into 4 groups. The groups do not necessarily represent the recommended or optimal progression of activity, but rather present the fitness professional with a structure of the characteristics of different exercise modes that should be considered when selecting activities. So here you can see the grouping of the cardiorespiratory exercise and activities. Group A would be an endurance activity that requires minimal skill or physical fitness to perform. So it's really recommended for all adults. So these things would be walking or cycling, water aerobics, or slow dancing. Group B would be vigorous intensity endurance activities that require minimal skill. And again, this would be for most adults who are habitually physically active and or at least average physical fitness. And this would be jogging, running, rowing, aerobics, spinning, elliptical, using the elliptical or a stepper, and some fast dancing. The endurance activities, exercise group C would be more endurance activities that require some skill to perform. And this would be for adults with some skill and or at least average physical fitness levels. And that would be swimming or cross-country skiing or skating. That requires an awful lot of skill involved. And then D would be recreational sports. This would be for adults with regular exercise program and at least average fitness. And that would be more for racket sports, basketball, soccer, downhill skiing, and hiking. Exercise duration and intensity are typically inversely related. As one increases, the other decreases. Thus, intensity of exercise must be considered when determining the duration. ACSM recommends 30 to 60 minutes per day or 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise, 20 to 60 minutes per day or 75 minutes per week of vigorous exercise, or a combination of both to improve cardiorespiratory fitness. This duration can be done in one exercise session, or it could be accomplished intermittently. If the exercise is done intermittently, then the minimum time should be 10 minutes for each interval. Sedentary individuals should begin with very short bouts of 5 to 10 minutes per day of low intensity exercise. Time and intensity should then be gradually increased while always being mindful of the client's fatigue level. The rate of progression will vary depending on the health status and age of the individual. Longer durations of exercise greater than 60 to 90 minutes are recommended for weight control, especially for those who are otherwise sedentary. This time frame does not include warm-up and cool-down, both of which should be completed in addition to the time spent at the target exercise program. Exercise volume is the product of frequency, intensity, and time, and type or fit of exercise. Exercise volume is used to estimate the gross energy expenditure of an individual's exercise program. Determining exercise volume is important in realizing health fitness outcomes, particularly with respect to body composition and weight management. Exercise volume is typically expressed in kcals per day, kcals per week, or METs per minute per week. And you can see on the next slide that it provides definitions and calculations for MET per minute, and kcal per minute. These then can be used to calculate volume in MET per minute per week and kcal per week to evaluate whether the exercise program is at the appropriate workload volume. And here you can see the calculation of each of these. So ACSM recommends a minimum goal of greater than 500 to 1,000 METs per minute per week. And so in doing that, trying to calculate based upon, again, the speed and the time, the frequency, intensity, and time for an individual. And this is, again, another calculation. Met values can be shown. So 20 minutes at 5 miles per hour, that's going to give them 172 METs per minute. This was based upon the person in the previous chart. Their volume for 2 days of activity would be about 344 METs per minute per week. And then their total volume for 4 days would be 542 METs per minute per week. It's really looking at the volume of exercise. Progression is a component of the exercise prescription and ensures that the overload is not applied in a manner that exceeds the cardiorespiratory system's ability to adapt. Any or all of the fit components needed to be increased to continually overload and challenge the cardiorespiratory system. Similarly, all should be adjusted to attain the goals of the client. When and how much to increase each component will depend on the client's initial fitness level, his or her progress, their health status, and goals. Intensity and duration of the exercise bout are usually increased first with duration increases ranging from 5 to 10 minutes for a couple of weeks before intensity is increased. Frequency may be increased from 3 days a week to 5 days per week, depending on the exercise responses and goals of the client. Volume of exercise is therefore gradually progressed during the course of the exercise prescription until goals are reached. Intensity, duration, and frequency of the exercise prescription until are gradually increased, which results in a gradual progression of the volume of exercise performed. As noted previously, if there is a decrease in the overload, such as an injury, travel, or unexpected work obligations, the system will de-adapt and fitness gains will be lost. Therefore, the fitness professional must work with the client to anticipate periods of decreased physical activity and plan for a safe re-entry back into the exercise program. To avoid an overuse injury, clients should refrain from jumping back into the same level of activity after more than a few days off. Tables 1512 and 1513 include examples of cardiorespiratory endurance programs for various types of activities, such as a walking and jogging program, and a typical mix of activities which may be available at a health club. For each, an overall scheme of a 6-month training progression is shown for an apparently healthy client. Use of the terms beginner, intermediate, and established to describe the fitness level of the client is somewhat subjective. For some individuals, even the beginner stage may present too much of a challenge. If so, start out with only 5 to 10 minutes of exercise, maybe more appropriate. The progression should not be too aggressive. Do not focus on achieving target goals quickly, but rather to gradually increase the overall workload to establish compliance and promote adherence. Progression should be individualized on the basis of the client's initial fitness level, their health status, age, and individual goals. For each stage, a range rather than a single number is included for frequency, intensity, and duration. The role of a personal trainer is to assist the client with the appropriate balance based on individual responses. Frequency of exercise progresses gradually over the 6-month period outlined from 3 days per week up to a target of 3 to 5 days per week. Intensity increases from a relatively low to a target of 70 to 85% of heart rate reserve. By slowly increasing the intensity, the client is able to adapt to the higher levels of exercise without becoming discouraged or experiencing regression or reversal of gains due to excessive overload. The duration of the exercise session also increases in small steps to allow appropriate adaptations. And finally, the fitness professional can consider changing the mode of exercise to provide more variety in the program. And this is just an example of a sample walking and jogging program. You can see in the first week, they're going slowly, walking in a pace for a couple of minutes. And so with an exertion level of 3 or 4 on the Borg scale for 10 minutes, at least twice a day for a total of 20 minutes each day, 3 days per week. So the total would be 60 minutes per week. And then making sure, of course, a cool down at a slow and easy pace. And then gradually trying to progress that, where they're walking at a pace, a slow and easy pace, warm up for 5 minutes, and then add 15 minutes to the weekly total until they get to 120 minutes. Or they're increasing to a level of 5 to 6 from a 3 to a 4. And again, gradually trying to increase the minutes per week to 150 minutes on up into the intermediate and experience level. And this would be the established level where they're walking or jogging and alternating that between a moderate and vigorous level on different days. And this is really just the summary of all of this. Really, frequency should be greater than 5 days per week of moderate exercise or 3 days per week of vigorous activity for a combination of moderate and vigorous exercise, more than 3 to 5 days per week. And again, ideally, you want the intensity level to be moderate to vigorous intensity for most adults. For those that are deconditioned, you're going to want for them to start out light and gradually increase that. And as far as time is concerned, 30 to 60 minutes of moderate exercise or 20 to 60 minutes of vigorous exercise, or a combination of both of those. And then the type, again, it needs to be something that's repetitive or rhythmic in nature, getting the heart rate up, and the volume should be greater than 500 to 1,000 METs per minute per week. And so that they're able to do things continuously. It may start out with small intervals, but gradually progress on up to a continuous session. So many clients are interested in losing weight and often consult fitness professionals. The ACSM position stand as appropriate physical intervention strategies for weight loss and prevention of weight regain for adults indicates that increasing activity levels above the baseline of 150 minutes per week of moderately intense exercise is important to assist with weight loss. In these situations, the recommended duration of exercise is 50 to 60 minutes per day, or 250 to 300 minutes per week. And we'll talk more about weight loss a little bit later. The implementation of effective cardiorespiratory endurance training programs requires that the fitness professional have knowledge of the current scientific basis of exercise. This chapter reviewed the ACSM guidelines regarding the time, type, volume, and progression. These guidelines provide a framework to structure the exercise program rather than a rigid checklist. The personal trainer must evaluate each client, look at the individually for health status and disease risks, and conduct individual fitness assessments, which are used to determine an appropriate level of exercise initially. The summary would be cardiorespiratory endurance training is an essential part of a client's overall exercise program. Other important components include resistance and flexibility training, which are detailed a little bit later. Each cardiorespiratory endurance training session includes 3 basic parts: the warm-up, endurance phase, and cool-down. A cardiorespiratory endurance program or prescription requires the FIT VP components: frequency, intensity, duration, and mode, as well as volume and progression. The fitness professional must balance the FIT VP components with the client's characteristics of health status, initial fitness, their life situations, their work schedules, availability of exercise time, their goals, their whether that's general fitness, weight loss, or competition, and their preferences. And that is all we have for today, guys. You have a great day. I look forward to talking with you soon.